Her stepmother sold the fat girl to Mountain Man for a bag of flour. He gave her a kingdom. She's not worth more than a bag of flour, the stepmother said. Take her or leave her. The words fell like stones in the tiny kitchen of the O'Brien house in Silverton, Colorado. It was the winter of 1878, the kind that froze rivers, split wood, and starved the poor. Outside, snow fell in thick silence. Inside, 18-year-old Molly O'Brien stood barefoot on the cold floor, clutching her apron as her stepmother, Constance, bartered her away like unwanted livestock. Constance's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You'll be lucky, girl. The Mountain Man will feed you better than we can. Now go pack your rags." The man she spoke to, Elijah Stone, said nothing. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a face half hidden by a dark beard. His eyes, sharp and steady, studied Constance with quiet disgust. He had come down from the mountains to trade furs for food. He hadn't expected this. "You're selling your husband's daughter?" he asked. Constance shrugged. "Not mine. And she's more trouble than she's worth. Always eating, always crying. You look like a man who needs someone to cook, clean, and keep quiet." Behind her, Molly trembled. She was round-faced, soft, with a quiet beauty buried beneath years of humiliation. Her stepmother had spent years convincing her she was unlovable, too fat, too plain, too much. Elijah glanced at the girl, then back at the stepmother. "You're a cruel woman," he said flatly. Constance laughed. "Cruel? No. Practical." Elijah exhaled through his nose, slow and heavy. "Fine. I'll take her." Molly's breath caught. The stepmother clapped her hands. "Good. Then she's yours." She shoved a small sack into Molly's hands, her only possessions, and opened the door. "Go on, girl. Don't look back." Molly hesitated, eyes filling with tears. "Please, Father," she whispered. Her father sat in the corner, too drunk to lift his head. He didn't speak, didn't even look at her. And so, without a goodbye, she stepped into the snow, following the silent man who had traded a bag of flour to set her free. As the door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoed across the frozen fields like the ending of one life and the uncertain beginning of another. The town would whisper about it for weeks, that the fat girl had been sold to the Mountain Man. Some pitied her, others laughed, but no one imagined that the girl who left in tears would one day rule over more than a home. She would rule over a kingdom of her own making. The journey up the mountain began in silence. Snow fell in fine white dust, coating the trail and the two travelers like ghosts. Molly followed a few steps behind Elijah, her boots sinking deep with every step. Her hands were raw from the cold, her breath shallow and uneven. She had expected him to shout at her, to command her like her stepmother always did. But Elijah Stone didn't speak a single cruel word. Every few miles he would slow his horse and glance back. "You keeping up?" he asked once, his tone calm, not impatient. She nodded quickly, afraid to slow him down. When her legs finally gave out, Elijah stopped. Without a word, he built a small fire by the trail and handed her his coat, thick, worn, smelling faintly of pine and smoke. "Sit," he said simply. "Rest." Molly hesitated. "You don't have to." "Sit," he repeated, softer this time. She sat. The fire warmed her numb hands. She stared into the flames, thinking of the home she had left, the kitchen that always smelled of burnt bread, her stepmother's sharp voice, the way her father's silence hurt more than words ever could. When they reached the cabin at last, dusk had fallen. The small house stood sturdy against the wind, smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, It was simple: one table, two chairs, a bed, and a stone hearth where firelight danced on the walls. It was nothing like the fine house she had been cast from, and yet it felt alive. Elijah set down his rifle and turned toward her. "You're safe here," he said. She blinked. "Safe?" He nodded. "I didn't buy you, Molly. I took you away from someone who'd already sold your soul a long time ago." Her lips trembled. "Why? Why would you do that?" Elijah looked at the fire. "Because no one else would." He walked to a wooden cupboard, took out a tin of beans, and poured them into a pot. "You hungry?" Molly's stomach growled before she could answer. Elijah gave a faint smile, the first she'd seen from him. "Then you'll eat first. I'll take what's left." It wasn't much beans and stale bread, but it was more kindness than she'd known in years. When he bowed his head before eating, she hesitated, then followed. "You pray?" she asked quietly. "Not much anymore," he said. "But I thank the land when it gives me something. It's all I've got." That night he gave her the bed and slept on the floor near the fire. She tried to protest, but he waved her off. "The floor's softer than it looks," he said, and that was the end of it. As the fire burned low, Molly lay awake, listening to the wind whistle outside. She could hardly believe this man, this stranger, had shown her more respect in one day than her family had in years. The next morning, Elijah handed her a mug of coffee, strong and bitter. "We've got work to do," he said. "The animals won't feed themselves." She followed him out to the small barn. The air was cold and sharp, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something new stirring in her chest. Hope. Elijah showed her how to feed the goats, how to check the traps, how to split logs without hurting her hands. He didn't laugh when she failed. He didn't raise his voice when she dropped the hatchet. And when she finally managed to split a log cleanly in two, he grinned a quiet, proud grin. "Told you," he said, "stronger than you think." That night she sat by the fire and watched him mend a fishing net. He didn't talk much, but there was comfort in the silence between them, a steady, grounding quiet that felt like healing. For the first time, Molly didn't dread tomorrow. She was still the fat girl, still unsure, still scarred by words that had broken her spirit, but the mountain didn't care about that. Neither did Elijah. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn not to care either. Days turned into weeks, and the mountain slowly began to change Molly. Or perhaps it allowed her to become who she had always been beneath the fear. Each morning, she woke before dawn to find Elijah already at work, hauling wood, mending fences, or feeding the animals. He never barked orders, never demanded. Instead, he taught, patiently, quietly. When she burned the bread, he only said, "Try again. Fire's a teacher, too." When she dropped a pail of milk and burst into tears, he simply handed her another and said, "We'll call that one a practice round." The rhythm of life on the mountain was harsh, but honest. Molly's hands grew rough, her shoulders stronger. The cold no longer bit so cruelly. It greeted her like a challenge. She had never known work could bring pride, that the ache in her back could feel like something earned. One evening, after a long day of chopping wood, Elijah found her sitting by the stream behind the cabin. The sunset painted the water gold, and Molly's reflection shimmered in it, cheeks flushed, hair tangled, eyes bright. "You built half the winter's woodpile yourself," Elijah said, dropping beside her. "That's something to be proud of." Molly laughed softly. Back home, they'd say I'm too clumsy for work, too big for anything delicate. Elijah picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the stream. They were wrong, he said simply. Molly looked at him, then back at the water. You really think so? He nodded. You see that mountain? He pointed toward the dark ridge above them. It doesn't ask to be smaller, doesn't apologize for how much space it takes, and still, it's the strongest thing around. Reminds me of you. The words hit her harder than she expected. No one had ever compared her to something powerful before. No one had ever said she was enough. Later that night, when Elijah was working on a leather harness by the fire, Molly found herself watching him. His hands were steady, scarred, capable. His face, illuminated by the warm light, was no longer frightening, but familiar. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. "Truly." He paused, setting the harness down. "Because I saw someone being broken down when she should have been built up." He looked into her eyes, then not with pity, but with understanding. "I know what that feels like." Silence stretched between them, deep and full. Then Elijah added, "The world's cruel to anyone who doesn't fit inside its narrow walls. So I built my own walls, up here, where I could breathe." Molly smiled faintly. "And you're letting me in?" He gave a small nod. "You earned it the moment you walked up this mountain and didn't turn back." As winter deepened, their bond grew stronger. The snow came heavier now, blanketing the cabin in white silence. On stormy nights, they shared stories by the fire of lost parents, of broken dreams, of the small miracles that keep people alive. Molly told him about her mother, the only person who had ever told her she was beautiful. "She used to say my heart was my best feature," Molly whispered, "but no one's ever looked close enough to see it." Elijah's voice was low when he answered, "I see it, Molly, clear as day." On the coldest night of that winter, the wind howled like wolves outside. The fire crackled, and the roof groaned under the weight of snow. Molly sat wrapped in a blanket, shivering slightly. Elijah noticed and stood, walking to his sleeping cot. He returned with another thick quilt. "Take it," he said. She shook her head. "Then you'll freeze." "I've slept through worse," he replied. But when she didn't take it, he sighed, sat beside her, and draped the blanket over both of them. For a long time, neither spoke. The storm raged outside, but inside warmth. Then Elijah said quietly, almost to himself, "You belong here, you know." Molly's breath caught. "Here, in the cabin?" He turned his head toward her, his eyes steady. "In this life, on this mountain, with me." Molly felt her throat tighten. She wanted to speak, to say she'd never belonged anywhere before, but she couldn't. Instead, she leaned her head against his shoulder. Elijah didn't move, didn't pull away. He just sat there, letting her rest. And in that moment, surrounded by the howl of the storm and the crackle of the fire, Molly realized something. The world below had tried to erase her, but up here, in this quiet wilderness, she was rewriting herself. By February, the mountain had swallowed the world in white. The trails vanished under deep snowdrifts, and the cabin became their island, two souls adrift in a sea of silence. Inside, life found its rhythm. Mornings began with the hiss of the stove, the scent of coffee and wood smoke mixing in the air. Molly had learned how to light the fire before dawn, how to bake bread that rose just right, how to mend Elijah's shirts when the seams split from work. She was no longer the timid girl who had arrived trembling in the cold. Her laughter filled the small rooms now, warm and unself-conscious. When she stirred the pot of stew at night, she hummed softly an old Irish tune her mother once sang, and Elijah would look up from his work just to listen. Sometimes he would find her outside, bundled in layers, feeding the chickens or sweeping the porch free of snow, her cheeks flushed pink, her hair messy under her bonnet, and when she turned to smile at him, something inside him always shifted, something he hadn't felt since before his world broke apart. He began building things again. First, a rocking chair for the evenings, he said. Then a new table, smooth and wide enough for two. When he caught Molly staring at the unfinished wood one night, he explained with a quiet smile, "If I'm going to have company for supper every day, I ought to make room for it." She laughed, shaking her head. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said simply. There was no need for grand gestures between them. Their affection lived in small things, in the way Elijah always left the last biscuit for her, or the way Molly mended his gloves by the fire without being asked. But beneath the calm, something deeper was growing, a tenderness neither dared to name. One afternoon, Molly slipped on the ice near the stream and twisted her ankle. Elijah was there in an instant, scooping her up in his arms before she could protest. "I can walk," she began. "I know," he said, his voice steady, but his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "But you don't have to." He carried her back to the cabin like she weighed nothing, his steps sure and strong. When he set her down on the bed, she noticed his hands trembling slightly. "You shouldn't be out there alone," he murmured. She smiled faintly. "You can't keep watch over me all day, Elijah." He met her gaze. "Maybe I want to." The silence that followed was thick and tender. He turned away first, clearing his throat. "I'll make tea," he muttered, and she bit back a smile. That night, the snow fell in slow, silent flakes, and the world outside seemed to disappear. Molly sat in the rocking chair while Elijah fixed a loose board near the window. She watched him work his quiet strength, the way he hummed under his breath without realizing. When he finished, she said softly, "You've built a lot since I came here." He looked around, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I needed a reason to keep busy." "What kind of reason?" she asked. He hesitated. "The kind that smiles when the bread rises, the kind that makes this place feel alive again." Her throat tightened. She looked down at her hands, then back up. "You mean me?" Elijah's voice dropped low. "I mean you." For a long time, the only sound was the crackle of fire. Then Molly stood and crossed the room slowly. She reached out, fingers brushing his sleeve. "You gave me more than a home, Elijah. You gave me a life. I was nothing when you found me." He shook his head. "You were never nothing. You just needed someone to remind you." Her eyes shone. "Then consider me reminded." He smiled a real smile, rare and quiet, and for the first time he took her hand. Calloused palm to calloused palm, it felt like a promise without words. Spring came reluctantly. The snow began to melt, revealing green shoots beneath the frost. Molly stepped outside one morning and breathed in the crisp air, sunlight catching in her hair. She turned back to the cabin and saw Elijah watching her from the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable but full of something fierce and unspoken. "What?" she asked, blushing. He shook his head. "Just thinking how right it looks you here." She smiled. "It feels right." And for the first time in her life, Molly O'Brien didn't feel like the girl who didn't belong anywhere. She felt like a woman who had built something worth keeping, not with wealth or beauty, but with warmth, work, and love. The cabin wasn't just shelter anymore. It was home. The thaw of spring brought more than sunlight. It brought the world back, and with it, trouble. One crisp morning, while Molly was gathering wild herbs near the stream, she heard voices echoing from the trail below. Harsh, familiar voices. Her stomach dropped before she even saw them. Constance. Her stepmother sat high on a horse, wearing a fox fur shawl far too fine for a woman who'd once bartered her stepdaughter for flour. Beside her rode Molly's father, thinner, grayer, eyes bloodshot with shame and liquor. Behind them trailed a man in a town sheriff's badge. "Molly O'Brien," Constance's voice sliced through the quiet. "You come out this instant." Elijah was already at the door, rifle in hand. His jaw tightened when he saw them. "Stay inside," he murmured to Molly. But Molly shook her head. "No, I've hidden long enough." She stepped forward, skirts brushing the mud, her chin lifted. Constance's eyes flicked over her with disgust. "Well, well, you've gotten fatter, haven't you? Guess life with your mountain savage suits your appetite." Elijah's grip on his rifle tightened, but Molly raised a hand, stopping him. "What are you doing here?" Constance smirked. "Collecting what's mine. You were sold under my household, girl, and now there are rumors your husband here is sitting on gold. Seems fair I come claim what I'm owed." "There's no gold," Elijah said flatly. She ignored him, turning to the sheriff. "This man took her against her will. I demand the law take her back." The sheriff, clearly uncomfortable, shifted in his saddle. "If she says she went willingly, ma'am, there's nothing I can do." Constance sneered. "She's a child, barely 18. He took advantage—" "I was 17 when you sold me," Molly interrupted, her voice steady. "And you didn't care if the man was 20 or 70, so long as he paid." Her father looked away. Constance snapped, "You ungrateful cow! You should be thanking me for finding you a man at all." Molly's hand shook, but she didn't back down. "You didn't find me a man. You tried to sell me like livestock. He saved me." Constance scoffed. "Saved you? Look around you. You're living in filth, wearing rags, and calling it love." Elijah stepped forward, his voice low and thunderous. "Watch your tongue, woman." The sheriff reached for his holster. "Mr. Stone, easy now." But Molly raised her voice before it could escalate. "No, she needs to hear this." She turned to Constance, her breath trembling. "You think this place is filth? This is the first home I've ever had. You think he's a savage? He's the first person who's ever treated me like I mattered." For the first time, Constance faltered. Molly pressed on, her voice rising with each word. "You spent your whole life looking down on me, calling me ugly, useless, too fat to be worth love, but look at me now." She gestured to the cabin behind her, the fields stretching beyond. "I built this life. I earned every inch of it. You sold me for a bag of flour, and I turned that flour into bread that feeds us every day." Elijah's eyes shone with quiet pride. Constance's face twisted with rage. "You think this will last? He'll leave you the minute he gets tired of your bulk. Men always do." Elijah stepped closer to Molly, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You're wrong," he said, his voice firm and calm. "I'm not like the men you know. I didn't come here to take, I came here to stay." The sheriff cleared his throat. "If she's here by choice, there's no case." Constance snapped, "You're all fools." Then she turned her horse sharply, spitting in the dirt. "Enjoy your little kingdom, you fat fool. The world will eat you alive one day." Her father lingered for a moment, shame flickering in his eyes. "Molly, I didn't know she'd—" "You knew enough," Molly said quietly. "You just didn't stop her." He nodded once, then followed his wife down the trail. When the sound of hooves faded, Molly realized her hands were shaking. Elijah turned to her, placing both of his rough palms against her face. "You did it," he murmured. "You faced them." Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them. "I had to. Not just for me, for the girl they said would never survive up here." Elijah leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "You didn't just survive, Molly. You built a life worth living." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying away the last echoes of Constance's cruelty. For the first time, Molly felt completely free, not because Elijah had saved her, but because she had saved herself. Spring turned to summer, and peace returned to the mountain, but peace, Molly knew, never lasted long when greed was involved. It began with rumors drifting up from town. A prospector had found gold dust in the stream near Elijah's land. Within weeks, Silverton buzzed with whispers that the hermit and his fat wife were sitting on a fortune. And when Constance heard, she saw her chance for revenge. One humid afternoon, as thunder rolled across the peaks, Elijah was out repairing the corral fence when he saw dust clouds rising from the trail below. He squinted, hand shielding his eyes. Horses, 5, maybe 6 riders, one of them in a black coat that gleamed with a sheriff's badge. Molly came running from the cabin, skirts gathered in her fists. "Elijah, it's them," she said, her voice trembling. "She's come back." Elijah set down his hammer and picked up his rifle. "Stay behind me." Constance rode into the clearing like a storm, her parasol snapping in the wind, eyes blazing with triumph. The sheriff she'd brought this time wasn't the same as before. This one looked mean, bought and paid for. "Well, well," she sneered, "still playing house, I see. Enjoy it while you can. You're trespassing on my husband's claim." Elijah frowned. "Your husband hasn't had a claim here in 20 years. "Correction," she said sweetly. "He does now. And I've filed for a search warrant. These hills belong to the town now. If you resist, you'll hang for it." The sheriff stepped forward. "By authority of Silverton law, I'm seizing this property for investigation." Molly's heart pounded. "There is no gold here," she cried. Constance's smile sharpened. "Then you won't mind us looking, will you?" Elijah's eyes darkened. "You set one boot past that gate, and you'll regret it." The sheriff sneered. "Are you threatening an officer?" "I'm warning a trespasser," Elijah said, his voice steady as the rumble of thunder. The standoff hung heavy in the air. Rain began to fall slow, steady drops that tapped against rifle barrels and leather saddles. Molly stepped forward before Elijah could stop her. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. "You think you can take this place because you got men with guns. But you'll never take what we built here. This land isn't yours. It's not bought. It's not sold. It's earned." Constance laughed bitterly. "Earned? By what scrubbing floors for this savage?" "By surviving you," Molly said, eyes blazing. "By learning that love and kindness are worth more than any gold you'll ever find." The sheriff's hand hovered near his holster. Elijah's rifle didn't waver. Then from the trees came the sound of more hooves' neighbors. From the valley below, men and women Elijah had helped through the harsh winter. They rode in silently, forming a rough circle around the clearing. One of them, old Mr. Keene, spoke up. "You're the one trespassing, ma'am. This land belongs to the man who keeps it alive." The sheriff hesitated, looking around. He wasn't paid enough to start a fight this far from town. Finally, he spat in the dirt. "Not worth the trouble," he muttered, turning his horse. Constance's fury cracked. "You fools! Do you know who you're defying?" Elijah finally lowered his rifle. "A woman who traded her soul for flour," he said quietly. Her face twisted, but she saw at the circle of townsfolk, the barrel of Elijah's gun, and the unwavering strength in Molly's eyes. There was nothing left to take. Constance yanked her reins, turning her horse hard. "This isn't over," she hissed, but everyone knew it was. When the last hoofbeats faded into the distance, Molly's knees gave out, and Elijah caught her. Rain ran down his beard, his voice low in her ear. "You did it again," he said. "You stood your ground." Molly looked up at him, smiling through tears. "I wasn't afraid this time." He brushed her wet hair from her face. "You had reason to be. But courage isn't about fear, Molly. It's about standing up anyway." As thunder rolled away down the valley, he kissed her slow, sure, certain. The rain softened to a mist, and for a moment the whole mountain seemed to breathe with them. They had defended their home not with bullets, but with truth. By autumn, the mountain had healed from the storm. The grass grew tall again, golden under the sun, and the air smelled of pine and smoke. Life settled into a gentle rhythm, days of work, nights of laughter, and silence that no longer felt empty. The cabin had changed, too. Elijah added a porch where they could watch the sunset, and Molly filled it with wildflowers, tiny bursts of color that looked like joy itself. A cradle sat by the hearth now, carved from cedar, rocking gently with every breeze that slipped through the window. Molly often sat there in the evenings, her hands resting on her rounded belly, humming softly. Elijah would be nearby, mending a tool or sharpening his knife, though most of the time he just watched her. "You still can't believe it, can you?" she teased one night. He smiled faintly. "I can believe a lot of things now, thanks to you." She laughed quietly, then grew thoughtful. "Sometimes I think about that day when she sold me. I thought my life was over, but it was just beginning." Elijah set his knife down and moved to kneel before her. "You turned pain into something beautiful. You took this lonely place and made it a home. I built walls, but you built life inside them." Tears welled in her eyes. "You gave me the chance." He took her hands, rough palms closing gently around her fingers. "You earned everything here, Molly. Every sunrise, every smile, every bit of peace. It's yours as much as mine." Outside, the last light of day spilled across the valley. The mountains glowed like old gold, and the world felt endless. Molly leaned her head on Elijah's shoulder, eyes closed. "It's quiet now," she whispered. "For the first time, it's really quiet." He kissed her forehead. "That's what freedom sounds like." And as the fire crackled and the wind hummed through the pines, the camera of life pulled back, showing a small cabin in a vast wilderness, glowing with warmth against the coming night. No longer a place of exile, no longer a cage, but a kingdom built not of gold, but of love, courage, and peace. Every time I tell a story like this, I'm reminded that love often finds us in the places we least expect, in broken hearts, in hard winters, in people the world forgets. Molly wasn't rescued because she was beautiful. She was loved because she was brave. And Elijah didn't save her. They saved each other. If you're listening right now, somewhere in the world, remember this. No one can sell your worth. No one can decide how much love you deserve. Tell me, where are you hearing this story from tonight? And if you still believe that kindness can change everything, don't scroll away. The next story is waiting for you. End of Her Stepmother sold the fat girl to Mountain Man for a bag of flour. He gave her a kingdom.